think there's an opportunity here to say, I'm going to leverage AI to redefine the work that I do and still make myself a valuable asset to this company and be very much part of the strategy. I think the takeaway is if you're sticking to your job description, I think it's a lost cause on the AI race.
They keep telling us that it's all over for HR. The age of AI is upon us, and that means HR should be prepared to be decimated. We reject that message. The future of HR won't be handed to us. Instead, it'll be defined by those ready to experiment, adopt, and adapt. Future-Proof HR invites these builders to share what they're trying, how it's going, what they've learned, and what's next. We are committed to arming HR with the AI insights to not just survive, but to thrive. Hello and welcome to the Future-Proof HR podcast, where we explore how forward-thinking HR leaders are preparing for disruption and redefining what it means to lead people in a changing world. I'm your host, Thomas Kunjappu, CEO of Cleary. Today's guest is Spandana Suddapalli, head of people at Vidmob, a people leader whose HR experience spans global tech, scaling startups, and deep work with C-suites on organizational transformation. Now, Spandana believes the future of HR lies in a redefined partnership between human insight and automated efficiency. That tension is something I'm excited to explore together. As AI reshapes administrative tasks and org structures alike, she sees a heightened need for strategic business partnership and a need to rethink performance and building emotional fluency as a competitive edge for organizations. So a lot to talk about, Spandana. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm pretty excited to be here.
Thank you for being here and to your plans as well. So tell me about your personal journey a little bit, about how kind of come into this function, the kinds of experiences you've had, and what kind of sparked your interest in HR to begin with.
Boy, how much time do you have? I actually was a bio major, if you can't tell by the plants, back in college. But I thought my journey was going to be in academia. I wanted to become a professor, and that's the trajectory I was kind of going toward. But I had a little bit of a gap where I needed a job before I could go back to grad school. And that's how I found Priceline. And they really just wanted me to come in and analyze their exit surveys. And I had a background in statistics, so I thought, why not? I could just use my degree to use. And then I found the world of corporate culture, and I never knew anything about it. And it was really, really fascinating. And I think Priceline was a very interesting place to be at a very interesting time because I felt like 2012, now I'm dating myself, was around when HR was also going through a huge tech transformation. We were looking at a lot more HR tech coming into play. And the people there were really adept at compliance and talking to people. However, it was not very data-driven strategic function. And so my 5.5 years there was like fully transformed into a data-driven strategic function. And that really kind of hit the bug for me. I was like, enough with the academia. I love this corporate culture. I'm going to stay in technology. And one thing that I also got really interested in is the fact that Priceline, which was owned by Booking Holdings, had different tech companies that they owned. So I got to do different projects across the board with Kayak and OpenTable and Booking and all of these really cool companies who were doing their own HR, but in very different ways. And so it was like a crash course into HR, essentially.
So that analytical mindset clearly served you well as you got into the role. Now we're at the cusp of this big transformation. Maybe back then it was about SaaS and analytics, and now we're talking all things AI. So it seems like a lot of HR projects with AI, some people are talking about they're doomed to fail. Why is that? Or are they doomed to fail?
Well, I think there's a lot of noise around it as we do with any sort of new innovation, right? I feel like I read a quote the other day. It's like AI may not be able to take your job, but someone who knows how to use it definitely will. And I think, especially for people functions, we do have to be a little careful with it. I know, Meta recently got in trouble for using AI for interview scans, but I don't throw in the towel and say it's doomed to fail. I think it's the way we use it and use it powerfully enough to make it that much better. I don't fundamentally believe that AI is going to fail us all.
So tell me about some of those guardrails, frameworks, how to go about it successfully. What experiences do you have and thoughts for others about doing it the right way then?
Yeah, one of the things and this might be a very generic example, but since COVID, we've gotten very much used to sort of this virtual world. And so when you interview people, it's always over Zoom or Google Meets, and people kind of got used to that. And so when we were doing interviews, even though we have a hybrid culture, so we are expected to be in the office 3 times a day, we kept doing our interviews virtually. And so we kept going through the whole full cycle recruiting process. And then we would make offers, and then we would bring people in and realize that this is not the person we wanted, or they're not performing well enough, etc. So there needs to be a bit of a mixture of human touch with using technology. I think leveraging this virtual world is really great, or even AI screens is really great, but there needs to be some human intervention. So I purposefully reached out to all of the leadership and said, from now on, we're not sending any offers out without an in-person interview. And I'd rather spend the money in having people fly over to the office to New York and meet with whoever it needs to be, the hiring manager or the CEO or the leadership. And then only we will make an offer. And that has, quite honestly, saved us a lot of money because we weren't exiting people 3 months later or 6 months later.
Fascinating. I guess now we're not talking about necessarily AI revolution, but certainly the shortcuts that have come with the virtual COVID era where everything's been shifted to remote and you got completely into efficiency mode. And so you've gotten the funnel all the way down to remote.
Yeah.
And actually, were you guys fully remote and then you kind of came back towards hybrid more recently, but kept the interview process fully remote?
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's like when you change processes, and again, I fully admit that the pandemic was a confusing time for all of us. Like we were just figuring out how to do so many things in a not.
Some of us got a lot of plants, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was a great
Confusing
time
time.
for plan to be a planned parent rather. But I think it does apply to the AI screening as well, in sort of like a contrast to that, just to bring it home.
Mhm.
Even when we use AI tools to screen resumes and stuff, we do test it against several other things. Is it like selectively only giving us DEI candidate? Is it only giving us candidates who are a certain age and over or under? So we do have those guardrails because, AI is only as good as the amount of times you use it, right? You got to keep feeding the prompts. And so it only gets better the more you use it. We are not at a stage where I feel comfortable opening it up to having AI interview screen someone. I still take that very personally. Like I still needed to be some recruiter or hiring manager initially talking to the person. But we do use it for resume screenings and stuff. But I do check those guardrails. Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing?
So thank you for taking that metaphor
Yeah.
from the COVID era and digital to the AI world. So in the previous example about interview process,
Mm.
you felt like you went too far with remote, too deep into the process. And I imagine the idea that got you to change that back and approach leadership to change the interview process was because of results of hiring and 3 or 6 month retention and
Yeah.
manager feedback. So you kind of unfortunately felt some pain that got you kind of reversing course.
Yeah.
In the world of AI, if I take the equivalent of that, it would be we got sued by someone who was a candidate. And so now we've realized we need to come back. So you can't quite have that, right? You want to be a little bit cautious. So you have a great example about a guardrail around effectively in decision making and in interview screening and any kind of human interaction. Your ethos is to make sure everything is human driven.
100%. And I think we do get a lot of feedback, especially given the market where it is. It's very hard to find a job now. And I hear that with every candidate I talk to. So the human element of this couldn't be more powerful right now. I've had candidates where I'm just happy to be talking to someone. I don't even care that I get this job. Not that they don't care, but it's like I'm happy that there is a human on the other side and they care about what I'm saying and want to listen to my experience or my career journey. AI stuff is a lot of the things that I use it daily is on around policy announcements, right? I write something, but then I'm like, wait, this is sounding too legalese. Can I just like kind of, zhuzh it up a little bit and make people excited about it? So that's what I use it for. And similarly for resumes, it's great for screening. So think like I need someone in New York and the resume clearly says LA, California. The person could be great, but I cannot hire them. And those screenings are really helpful. But the other humanistic aspects of it, you do have to be very careful. And I fundamentally believe that.
So, okay, let me stick on this topic one more just to push you a little bit further
Yeah.
because you're right. In a weak labor market and one that is inundated, especially in the recruiting funnel,
Yeah.
with just hurdles of robots coming in your way, that's the average experience with the idea of efficiency for the employer. And given that there's a lot of power for employers and a push from a lot of CFOs and leadership to just focus on efficiency, cut down on cost, efficiency for everything, especially back office, including HR.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for much more of that. You're specifically, and as with your leadership team, have resisted that and saying, no, there's some lines that we want to draw with our recruiting process anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Where we want to spend, think of it as spending more money, right? By being thoughtful and spending more time with human experiences.
Yeah.
How does that happen? Right? Like, what is the case that you can make to a naive CFO that says, what everyone else is doing, let's cut costs. Why are we doing all this?
Yeah. Well, that tension is always there. I think if you, as the head of people, don't experience tension with your head of finance, then one of you is not doing the job right. Right. Like it's always, don't get me wrong, I really like our CFO and we do have healthy debates around what makes sense. What I do appreciate though is it's really important to do your own research ahead of time whenever you're trying to make a point or trying to get approval on something, right? I look at recruitment costs, and a lot of the time we rarely outsource our recruiting. We're doing it in-house. And I try to calculate the amount of time and money we would have spent in recruiting someone and how much that would cost. And are we willing to do that 3 months in a time where we now have to exit them, potentially have to give them severance because the job market is bad and you feel bad for doing this and whatever. I've had an instance where someone signed their offer letter, showed up to a work event before their start date, just so they can meet people, etc. And I got feedback from literally everybody on the team, just calling, including people who ended up interviewing them, saying, this person was just not right at the event. I feel very uncomfortable about them coming in and starting to work, etc. And that was like, this person already signed the offer. And that's a very hard conversation to have because they've already put in their resignation. They're about to come in and they're trying to start this new job, very excited about it. And now I have to make that call saying, sorry, I think we're going to rescind the offer because there were concerning pieces of feedback on your behavior. We probably spent, I don't know, X amount of thousands of dollars in interviewing this person that I could have spent in flying someone over to meet us in person and make that decision. So the simplest answer to that is the way I handle our CEOs is to show up with a spreadsheet. I always have a spreadsheet. Like, it doesn't even matter if it's a conceptual conversation, like it's just good for the business. I always put numbers to it. And it may not always tell a good story, but I think that's the language they really understand.
Interesting. So I had two takeaways from that. Yes, the data, but also you did tell a story here, which is putting a real emphasis on what happened with a very specific instance,
Yeah.
but you're really making a broader case, but which really just gets in the minds of the team that you're looking to convince. So I think that is clearly a part of the arsenal here to make the case. But the other thing that sticks out to me is just how thankless the HR job can be. That is a tough conversation to have, and people aren't saying, great, here's an award for doing that.
No.
And yet, that's the kind of tough stuff that needs to happen behind the scenes to enable the workforce. So let's switch gears a little bit and
Yeah.
talk about the workplace more broadly, because
Yeah.
HR has its place within this transformation that is happening across the board. So let's talk about performance, maybe. So how should we rethink performance from all aspects within an AI integrated workplace?
Oh boy, there's so many avenues we can go with performance. I don't even know which one to touch. There's this idea of, is AI going to take over my job, to how am I going to be evaluated against bots and agents versus human intervention? So I think more broadly, I do hear this narrative of the landscape itself changing in the workforce. And again, performance is such a huge component of what we do because it hits culture, it hits aptitude, it hits skill set. So it's just like, how do we assess this and how do we make sure the right people are staying? And also, the new question you have to answer is, do I need a full head count for this thing that needs to get done? And that is like a very massive conversation a lot of heads of HR are talking about right now. And headcount planning has never been the same after that. I do it every year where we're reevaluating, okay, there's a business strategy change. Do we need X number of people doing this thing that we're no longer going to be provisioning for our clients? And I think that's both an innovation wise really exciting, but from a people perspective, it almost feels diabolical, right? You never want to tell someone, hey, we realize that this job doesn't need a full-time person to be doing this. And that's a tough conversation to have because people are then going to be like, what do you mean? You hired 7 people to do this job, and now you're telling all of them that you don't need them anymore. And that has implications to culture, and it has implications to how people perform because they all of a sudden everybody's on edge about their own jobs. Contrary to, I'm a big believer in AI, and I think it's going to transform the way we work. That's not everybody's belief. And we recently did a pulse survey and we did ask people because AI adoption is part of our strategy. And I do want people to start using it a bit more. And our question was, how likely are you to adopt to AI tool in your day-to-day job and how that's going to change your role, being more effective, et cetera? Only 70% said yes, that they are very actively using AI tools or would like to use AI tools. So there's still like 30%, which isn't a small number, who are like very much AI resistant.
And there's an industry context here, right? Because depending on the industry that you're in, it should be, I would imagine, a lot lower than that in many other industries. Even.
100%. And I'm in a tech industry and like I'm not having any different conversations than many other heads of HR are having in their role. But as Gen AI became more mainstream, we actively added it to our own strategy a couple years ago, just around the same time most companies were. I cannot tell you how many exit interviews I've had where people were like, I just don't like AI. I got to get out of here. Like that was sort of like the theme of it. And so those are like kind of going back to performance. Assessing performance has never been more challenging than now because the role itself, the job itself is changing constantly. My job changes constantly. My team's job changes constantly. It's like everywhere. Before it was pretty straightforward because you hand someone a job description. You say, here are your responsibilities. This is what we're measuring you against. And you get a score based off of that. Maybe you do upward reviews, downward reviews, 360s, whatever. Now the constant struggle I get is like, my job wasn't the same 3 months ago. So what are you actually assessing me on?
This has been a fantastic conversation so far. If you haven't already done so, make sure to join our community. We're building a network of the most forward-thinking HR and people operations professionals who are defining the future. I will personally be sharing news and ideas around how we can all thrive in the age of AI. You can find it at gocleary.com/Cleary-community. Now back to the show. So you talk about both the performance review right there, but earlier you're also talking about just headcount planning.
Yeah.
It almost feels like anything that has a half-life where you're trying to look more than a few weeks out, a few months out, a couple quarters out, any process that is in that kind of cyclical level, it needs to be rethought or it's riskier, right?
Yeah.
Companies used to have 5-year strategic plans. I feel like that's a little less in vogue for most industries,
Yeah.
but that was a standard at least a couple of decades ago. And in some ways, right, quarterly KPIs or OKRs have kind of replaced the 5-year strategic plans.
Yeah.
But then there's that dynamic nature, and you're also hitting on the psychological impact here, right? So I think I always hear about agility and ability to learn or adaptability. Those are just things that are going to be more valued. But based on what you're saying, maybe things are accelerating too fast, right? And for a big part of the working population, it's just too much. And of course, in an exit interview, that's the one place where you can be pretty nakedly open with your thinking, right? As close to it as you kind of see in the corporate world. What does that mean for workplaces then? Is it that there's a static percent of the population that is not going to be fit for or going to be interested in the kinds of jobs of the future, the ones where the people using AI are going to replace the people
Mhm.
who are doing it before?
I can only speak from a people perspective because we are in the people business and that's how I view things. Like, is customer success going to go away? Maybe, right? Like, if it's just a means of prompt that we need to give people and you just have bots doing it, perhaps. Maybe I'll tell a story. Very, very, very early on in my career, I had a boss who's still a mentor of mine. And my go-to was always spreadsheets. And I was like, I'm going to do compensation, I'm going to do operations, and this is really comfortable, whatever. But his thinking was, well, if you're going to be a head of HR one day, you are going to have conversations. And that was not my forte. It's not my comfortable space. And this guy had a talent for firing people, and they would
Never heard it
send
quite
him.
described that way, but
No,
tell me
no,
more.
but he had people send him fruit baskets after he fired them because they were like, wow, this is the best thing that's happened to me. Now I can go retire or I can work on this hobby that I put off or whatever it was. So he was really good at it. And he was like, you have to do this. So he kind of gave me pointers on how to do it. And there was one thing that I took away. It was like, yes, you're delivering really tough news, but that's that much more important to remember how you're delivering it. And so I take that in stride in everything I do. I'm not always delivering good news. Actually, most of the time I'm not. But there's a way to deliver that in a way people don't feel just completely let down by it, right? And that is the difference I think the people in people space need to really focus on. This is not going to be, at least for a long time, I don't think is going to be replaced by AI, which is why I think when we first met, I told that story of I was in a board meeting and one of the board members said, Spandana is the only one who's going to have a job in the future because it has to deal with managing both bots and people, and that's the reality of the world. And so, again, I think, which is why I'm very thoughtful going back to the recruiting question is like, I take every interview that I do very seriously. And my team also makes sure that we respond to every application. We make sure that we are letting them know where they are in the process and try to be as transparent as possible. So the human element of it is, I think, the biggest thing we have to leverage as people in the people space and not be spooked by what's coming down the pike with AI.
So how do you enable that in the organization to not be spooked, to know that change is coming, it's ever increasing, roles are going to change. Yes, it's going to be hard for you or us or anyone to look at performance the same way. How can you coach that or enable in an organization?
I don't think it's a new formula. It's a formula that's been used and driven and proven with. I come from a startup culture. Some days you are watching sunrises from your desk because that's just the reality of being in a fast-paced environment. The people I find who are very, very successful in those environments are people who are redefining their work and redefining their roles. And I push myself definitely to be adaptable and try to come up with ways where we can be adaptable. And I encourage my team to do that too. A lot of the times the question is, hey, I used to do this and I feel like AI is going to take over my job.
We've all heard that before. Yeah.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think there's an opportunity here to say, I'm going to leverage AI to redefine the work that I do and still make myself a valuable asset to this company and be very much part of the strategy. I think the takeaway is if you're sticking to your job description, I think it's a lost cause on the AI race.
And also it's on you, right?
Yeah.
It's not on leadership, your management, HR. I mean, to some degree, they need to be thinking about this at the organization level, but it's on you specifically to understand and redefine, well, what is higher value for you to be working on, right? And
Yeah. And
that's no way
guess
for others.
exactly. The leadership does a lot where it's like, as things are moving, at least we do, where we try to give people tools around AI and we try to encourage them to use them, put in policies for adoption, and also kind of warn them around guardrails and stuff, so around compliance and things. So that already exists. I don't know if you've ever seen this very famous President Obama clip where he's like, oh, you go into these like big places and you're sitting with like hedge funders and Harvard grads and whatever. And once you're there, you're like, oh, they're not all that. So they're actually not that smart. So I think people need to be a little bit more pragmatic. I think waiting for leadership to do something is not actually going to help your career. My advice to you would be to think of something maybe even leadership hasn't thought about and you present it to them and they're all already like, whoa, this person is so impressive, you know?
So let's talk about that with the HR function a little bit more
Yeah.
deeply, right? That concept of that, hey, all roles are changing. There's going to
Yeah.
be a shift in that. Let's talk about like how HR roles may shift and how would you go about redefining and pick your role, right? How do you think about the various sub functions or the leadership roles within HR evolving? And do you have any ideas or examples about how we might put that nugget into practice, which is how can you yourself think about okay, ways to evolve my own role based on new possibilities.
Yeah, super futuristic. I think we will end up in a world where we are also managing bots as we are with humans. So that is what is coming. I know that that's sitting there. But right now, a few things that I do is you mentioned that we're going so fast, we're moving too fast, right? And in that world, it's really important to have right policies in place. So that is a big thing that I do where it's like you can't just run with using AI. You have to have certain guardrails, you have to have checks and balances. So I definitely do that. We have to monitor or be cognizant of the type of AI tools people are using. So it's like, is it OpenAI versus Claude AI? And there's like, there are different iterations of it. There's that to be very, very tactical. There's also privacy issues, right? Like, are we divulging company secrets? We have to be very careful about that. So those are the aspects of it that I definitely get into in terms of current working environment. The other thing I have heavily encouraged, though, within the people team is to carve out time to see what developments are happening on the HR space, just so we are ahead of how other companies are using AI and potentially being able to leverage that.
Yeah, carve out time to learn yourself. But yeah, those are some very practical things. I guess as an HR leader, yeah, you need to have the skill set going forward to create and help craft a company-wide AI policy around
Yeah.
governance. Maybe a training and onboarding probably for most companies is valid at this stage. And that includes the policies around knowing about data privacy, which is always was a thing, but it's just even more, I guess, arguably top of mind with AI tools. But as long as we have so many tools that we can log into, that still holds.
Yeah.
But it just seems to escape faster.
Well, there's also like the funnest example I've heard is I think this woman from the UK, it was a small company. It was like, 60 people or something. She had everybody write a paragraph of what their day to day looks like, a day in the life of looks like. And they all did. And they sent it to her. And she put it in a AI tool. And then she asked it to build an employee life cycle for each of the roles that they had. And it did. And she like sent it over and she was like, here are the 5 things you can do to improve your career or do whatever. So it's just like there are a lot of fun things happening in this
Mm.
space. And I do think we're only just scratching the surface.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So think about how you can crowdsource different things. I mean, everyone has their survey data. There's probably ways to slice that stuff into creating outputs that you otherwise maybe wouldn't imagine using that as an input for. So you can play with inputs and outputs is kind of a takeaway there. That's pretty
Yeah.
interesting. Let me ask you about the futuristic thing that you mentioned. So, yeah. So, what does that mean? So, what does that mean as bots and agentic AI becomes part of, I don't know, has become part of headcount planning? These tools are increasingly just part of the, their teammates in some ways, right? But arguably, it's just what software has always been, which is here's a function in the B2B space, right? Here's a function. Here are people working on certain outcomes, and here's some software to get them there faster. And now this is like just maybe there's a greater percentage software, fewer people. I don't know. But how does that change, especially if anything, the HR lens, right? As you go towards headcount planning or enabling various functions?
That's a tough question to answer because I don't think we're there yet, but I know we're getting there very, very quickly. It's hard to imagine that it wouldn't have an effect on literally everything, right? Like how we do performance, how do we think about headcount planning? My thinking is in an agentic world, the role of HR is going to be a lot more technical. Like if you do not have any technical chops, I highly recommend that you do it now just to kind of be able to explain why things are going well or not going well. And I think that's really important. And then the second piece of it is there's always going to be that tension of, AI is able to do this today. Is AI able to do something else to the extent where there are no people working and it's just agents, right? Hopefully it doesn't happen in my lifetime, but if it does, then there's so many iterations of working that we haven't even scratched the surface on. Like when I was in grad school, we talked about, are you familiar with DAOs, the decentralized autonomous organizations?
Mhm.
So, and then I
Had kind
remember,
of gone up and down along with the rest of the crypto world in
I,
a few years. Yeah.
yeah, but it was like only 2 years ago that I had a professor who like firmly believed in DAOs. And that's what she thought we were all heading towards. Like there's not going to be no more corporate entities, no more like Delaware Incorporated or whatever it is. We're all just going to be communities coming together. I can see a world where it's all agentic and people are just kind of like contributing to projects, etc. But I don't know, it's a very hard question to answer now with like how the agentic and human mixture is going to affect our workforce and the way we work.
When you bring up DAOs, for me, it almost made me realize maybe we are currently in the peak cycle of that hype cycle with AI, just like you were when you're taking that course with where DAOs were. And it's just actually this future with like AGI and organizations that are not just organizing, but just like working with agents is
Yeah.
just asymptotically 5 to 10 years away. And there's like so much more that we need to build towards actually get that right. But in fact, there are many other problems to solve
Yeah.
in the near term or even in the near term generations,
Yeah.
but who knows? But it's always interesting to think about how that could turn out. So let me ask you then, just as we close out here, just around building an AI strategy, right? As like advice for peers. I think you were telling me you went to like a boot camp and you learned a bunch of stuff and then
Yeah.
you launched an AI policy within a week, right? And that's something you mentioned as like a tactical thing that people should be able to do. So if I'm an uninitiated CHRO or people ops person or HRBP, whatever the case may be, and I want to like do that, what did you do? How did that go from like soup to nuts to launch something like that?
Yeah. Well, the truth of the matter is whether you have a fully functioning AI policy or not, your people are using AI. And so where I started was with our head of compliance and security to see which AI tools were the most famous amongst our people. And then we also got to see, because we use Google Suite, we do use Gemini quite a lot. And so we also got to see what sort of things that they're really using it for. And then my second stop was with legal to talk through some of the risks and what are the guardrails and the things that you can do or cannot do within the policy. So we did that. And then we also encouraged AI adoption. So we've had Gemini come in and do demos on how to use them, particularly for our customer success people. And it really took off. Like everybody, and again, we're a 100 people company, so it's not massive, but people took off and came up with very creative ways of servicing our clients, and none of them were the same. I can use AI for this, and I can use AI for that. But it was very much, they all have the same job. That was very exciting to see. But it was all within, if you do have a policy in place, then it makes things that much easier because you've already communicated those guardrails. And you mentioned lawsuits earlier, it also avoids those.
So thank you for a bit of a roadmap. And it's not a multi-year project either, right? As you
No.
can get it up and off the ground and making an impact and getting some alignment, reducing the risk exposure and getting some alignment across compliance, legal, the employee base, functional leaders, and even just tooling
Yeah.
standardization could be a part of the wins. One last question. if I could just ask, if you're talking to your peers,
Yeah.
because you're moving at a pace, I can feel that in terms of AI adoption, both at your function as well as the organization overall.
Yeah.
And what would you say to your peers and HR leaders who feel a bit paralyzed by the pace of change that's happening around them in other functions or in other companies? Like, they're not sure exactly how to start, where to go, what to do. Like, what would be your message to them?
Yeah, I would say, uh, look, I fully get that it could be dizzying seeing all of this. And particularly if you're in a head of HR role, you're talking payroll to the future of HR on any given day. And so you're constantly context switching. My recommendation would be to not try to solve for all of it at the same time. And the good thing about HR, and we talked about this before, HR tech is like the last to innovate on anything. And so the good news is, even if it feels like we're in a rat race, chances are this particular function isn't going to innovate as fast as you think it's going to. So I would say take a couple of items. It could be learning and development, or it could be performance management, it could be engagement. Take one of those and see how. Actually, one of the easiest things people can do is compensation. AI has changed the game. Like before, I used to run 128 column spreadsheets of like comp merit cycles, etc. I think I forgot a lot of Excel formulas now because I don't use them fast enough. So definitely look at what the low hanging fruit are, where you can incorporate it slowly, and definitely don't try to do all of it at once.
Thank you for sharing that. And for the broader conversation, Spanda, there's so much we talked about,
Of
specific
course.
use cases that you're doing within your function, as well as a lot of the change management and development opportunities and challenges that you've faced as an HR leader that many of us out there are going through. So
Yeah.
I think there's some insight and some experiences that we can all learn from. And I also appreciate the future. You're looking at all the shifts that can happen, but also appreciating the guardrails that you want to put in place so that you're actually mindfully moving fast and slow at the same time, from what I
Mm.
can tell. Like, that's maybe one way to put it, in that you have guardrails in place, you're thinking about which areas to drop it into,
Yeah.
but also you're being explicitly human and non-AI in certain types of engagements, right? Or certain types of moments in the employee journey on purpose.
Yeah.
So I think that's really thoughtful and a good place for many people to go. So, with all that said, thank you once again for the conversation. For everyone out there listening, thank you for your attention, and I hope you found some value in this about how you might be able to future proof your organization and your HR function so that we can all thrive within the age of AI. So, with that said, we'll see you all on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Proof HR. If you like the discussion, make sure you leave us a 5-star review on the platform you're listening to or watching us on. Or share this with a friend or colleague who may find value in the message. See you next time as we keep our pulse on how we can all thrive in the age of AI. Hey, it's Thomas again. One quick question before you go. Are you and your HR team tired of answering the same employee questions again and again in Slack? If yes, our Cleary AI-powered Slack bot is here to help. It takes routine employee requests and answers it automatically while freeing up time for you to take on more important tasks. At the same time, it automatically builds up an HR knowledge base as you go. It's quick to set up, works right in Slack, and you can try it for free. Just head on over to gocleary.com/HR-chatbot to install it. It's, again, gocleary.com/HR-chatbot. Thanks again.